Everybody, welcome back to the channel. It is me, the layman apologist, and man, I am blinded by the sun. Apologies, I probably don't have the best lighting right now. Before I go too deep, could somebody please put in the comments if they can hear me? Otherwise, I'm probably talking to myself again. This seems to happen every time I stop streaming for a bit. Now, I have got some, well, I suppose there's no point me speaking until I know people can hear me. So let's see. I wonder if the editor is watching. Bear with me. I'm going to mute up and I'm going to see if I can hear it in my own feed here. Hang on. Okay, we have audio. Tina, good to see you. She can hear me. That's good. You technically, if I would have waited like a split second later, Tina, I would have seen that. Anyway, folks, I have not streamed in quite some time. I have been on a little bit of a break. I'm still technically on a slight break. Like, I'm not planning getting back into full time content anytime soon. The editor still has a lot more pre-recorded videos that he needs to put out, which is good. He's on schedule with all of that. I'm probably going to do the odd live stream and ease myself back in. I am not streaming on X or anywhere else yet, mainly because I want to build up this YouTube channel a little bit where our views are quite low at the minute, but that's because I have not been in the algorithm. And also, we are a smaller channel, so that will naturally happen. Anyway, folks, like I said, we're going to be reacting to well, we're not really even going to be reacting. I'll react here and there, but we're going to watch the Fauci hearing, mainly because I missed it yesterday. I didn't see the full thing. I only saw clips of it, and I would quite like to watch it. However, I have a boatload of work that I need to do in the background because I'm launching a new channel on Saturday. It's going to be more of a personal channel filled with my non-theological interests. So only subscribe if you're interested. If you want to know what that channel is, I can let you know a little bit later on in the program. That's not really the point of right now, but we are going to go ahead and I'm just going to get into this because I've got some work that I need to do in the background, and then we will watch this and you guys are free to talk. I will probably interact a little bit, but I do have some stuff I need to do in the background, like I keep repeating. So, anyway, folks, let's go ahead and watch this. I just need to make sure I've got the volume right.
Order.
You can put in the comments if you can't hear anything, by the way. And while you listen, I'm going to go and do some work. So, enjoy, folks.
1 million Americans died from COVID-19. Some estimate as many as 15 million people died worldwide from COVID-19. Publicly, Anthony Fauci promoted the theory that the virus arose naturally, while privately, he was well aware of a mountain of evidence suggesting the virus originated in the lab. The American people deserve answers. The American people deserve to know why dangerous research was funded by NIAID in a totalitarian country, in a lab that lacked acceptable safety standards. The decision to fund dangerous gain-of-function research in Wuhan, China, will likely go down in history as perhaps one of the worst public health decisions. Frankly, the American people deserve an apology. I hope today Dr. Fauci will come clean, admit it was a mistake to fund dangerous research in China, admit.
Well, I'm not going to interrupt too much, but from what I saw in the clips, this little weasel of a man tried to keep hiding behind the Fifth Amendment, which he no longer has any right to because he was fully pardoned.
That the risk of this dangerous research exceeded any possible benefits. Ask forgiveness and pledge to help our government devise safeguards so a man-made epidemic never happens again. Instead of an apology, you have for years avoided responsibility. Regarding the lockdowns, you argue that you did not personally issue every lockdown order, close every school, or impose every mandate. But officials across the country invoked your authority to justify these decisions. And you presented your recommendations not as judgments open to debate, but as dictates of science itself. Your own words demonstrate that you understood the influence you exercised. On March 14th, 2020, you wrote that the task force recommendations were driven by me, yourself, Deb, and CDC. The next day, you wrote that you had convinced Mayor Bill de Blasio to close the New York City schools, so you were involved. That same night, Governor Gavin Newsom's chief of staff told you that the governor had decided to close California schools, bars, and restaurants after watching you on television. Presidents, governors, mayors, school boards, corporations, and Congress all bear responsibility for the decisions they made. The COVID lockdown, however, could never have been inflicted without you aiding and abetting the crime. Children lost years of education. Small businesses built over a lifetime disappeared. Patients delayed cancer screenings and other medical care. Families were separated from dying relatives. Workers were ordered to accept a medical.
The reason why this hits so close to home is we had a similar case. My mum lost her partner during COVID. They weren't married or anything. My mum, she's not a believer. Um, she was refused access during his last days, and he didn't have COVID, didn't have anything like that, and he died in the hospital alone. Uh, this man and everyone else involved in it, there should be a very swift trial and then immediate hangings.
Procedure or lose their jobs. Worship assembly, employment, education, and travel were restricted in the name of science. While you did not impose every restriction, you used your public authority to justify them. While you concluded publicly that COVID occurred naturally, your private record tells a different story. In early 2020, your hand-picked virologist warned that the virus appeared to have been manipulated in the lab. In a conference call concerning the origin of the virus, all but two of the participants believed deliberate insertion was possible. Your concern was not merely theoretical. That same week, you led an urgent effort to determine whether your own agency had funded the research related to these experiments that were now under suspicion. Hours later, your assistant reported that the Wuhan experiments had indeed been reviewed and approved by the NIH. Those were not the actions of officials who believed that a research-related origin was an absurd conspiracy theory. They were the actions of officials urgently trying to determine whether their agency funding was connected to the research under discussion, connected to the pandemic. You could not hide that your agency had funded the Wuhan research or your long history of defending gain-of-function research. The only alternative left was to argue that COVID-19 did not originate in the Wuhan lab. You were not a detached observer. You had an institutional interest in the public believing that
Little
federally
weasel.
funded research had nothing to do with the pandemic. It was a conflict of interest from the very beginning. The authors of the proximal origin of SARS-CoV-2 privately had serious doubts about a natural origin. Within days, though, they flipped, and they all wrote in proximal origin that the virus was almost certainly not a laboratory construct. That paper was then used by the government and the media and you to discredit Americans who were asking the same questions that you and the authors were asking yourselves privately. You even cited proximal origin from the White House podium. You held it out as evidence that the virus could not have been engineered, but you didn't disclose your role in the discussions that preceded the writing of the paper. You did not disclose the author's original concerns. You did not reveal that you had been part of the paper, that you had read and offered editorial comments on the paper before it was published, before you began using it as evidence that it couldn't have originated in the lab. You did not disclose that you had immediately investigated yourself whether NIAID funding might be connected to the research. You did not tell the American people the full story. Duly released private messages indicate that the doubts with the authors and others didn't disappear after the publication. So while this was being waved at the White House to show that it couldn't come from the lab, the authors were still privately continuing to assign a meaningful probability to a laboratory origin, one thing in public and another in private. Some of the
Snake-tongued
same scientists
individuals.
discussed avoiding email and carefully managing communications that might eventually be obtained under the Freedom of Information Act. The pattern is straightforward. Privately, there was alarm. then an immediate inquiry to see if NIAID's possible exposure to funding, then a rapid public declaration of certainty, continued private doubt, and then years of resistance to disclosure. The question is why? The only logical answer is that your primary concern was avoiding culpability. Your primary concern was hiding the fact that you had approved the funding for this dangerous research. Your support of gain-of-function research is extensive and long-standing. In 2011, your agency funded Ron Fauci's laboratory when it mutated the avian flu until it could spread through the air between mammals. This was the tipping point. This is when others became worried. You funded this. You advocated for this. The federal government's own biosecurity board, though, recommended withholding the details of these experiments because of the danger the research posed. People were concerned that publishing it was publishing a roadmap to creating bioweapons around the world. But you sided with the gain-of-function scientist Fauci and argued that the benefits of publishing the research far outweighed the risks. You defended this avian flu transmissibility experiments as critical research. You wrote that even if a scientist became infected and triggered a pandemic, the benefits of the gain-of-function experiments outweighed the risk. In 2014, your agency, NIAID, began funding the Wuhan bat coronavirus work. In 2015, Ralph Barrick and the Chinese scientist Shi Zhengli published NIAID-supported research combining a bat coronavirus spike protein with a SARS backbone. The resulting virus could infect human airway cells. It's a novel virus that now can infect human cells. It gained transmissibility, it gained function. In 2018, the same group of scientists, EcoHealth, Barrick, Shi, and their collaborators submitted the diffuse proposal, which involved the insertion of a furin cleavage site into the coronavirus. DARPA rejected it as too dangerous. When COVID was sequenced, though, early on in January of 2020, within days, scientists discovered that, lo and behold, it had a novel furin cleavage site, just as had been proposed in the diffuse project. This was either an extraordinary coincidence or a smoking gun, evidence that the Chinese had created COVID-19. It made
Surprise,
the laboratory
surprise.
origin question more legitimate, and it made your categorical public denials indefensible. On May 11th, 2021, you told the Senate, the NIH has never, ever, and does not now fund gain-of-function research in Wuhan, in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. When I gave you the opportunity to correct the record, to reconsider the statement, you responded that you had never before lied to Congress. We were then told that only the government's narrowest regulation of definition counted here, that you could define gain of function in one way in which this wasn't gain of function, in which all of the common sense of the world would be thrown out, all of the idea that the mice were dying and the virus was more transmissible didn't matter because you had a technical definition that allowed you to fund it. But the real question is, was it dangerous? Was it a wise decision to fund this? And you haven't deviated from that. You've never admitted that it could have been a mistake funding this research in China.
Oh, it was a
The
mistake.
American
All
people
right.
weren't asking for a semantics debate over what is gain of function. They were asking, does common sense say this research was dangerous in Wuhan? They wanted to know whether their money-funded experiments in Wuhan that made bat coronaviruses better able to infect humans. The
Like, here's the simple thing. He knows it was bad. It wasn't a mistake to him. It was planned. It was done with intent. They purposely played around with viruses to infect people. This has been their plan from the beginning. This is why, as I say, it should be. This is only a hearing. But unfortunately, he received a pardon. He shouldn't have a pardon. What he should be is on a very swift trial and then straight to execution.
answer is yes. They wanted to know whether NIAID adequately supervised their work. The answer is no. When you defended this research, you described its benefits in the broadest terms. But when Congress demanded accountability, you hid behind the narrowest possible definition. You can't have it both ways. Your conduct concerning federal records raises further questions. It is a crime to destroy federal records. Yet our investigation reveals your assistant diligently reported that she deleted tons of emails. In 2024, you testified that you did not delete federal records. Who's telling the truth, you or your assistant? The committee has obtained repeated instructions from you telling federal officials to delete communications. On February 2nd, 2020, one day after Origin's call, you told Francis Collins, please delete this email after you read it. The committee asked for your voluntary cooperation to come today. Your appearance had to be compelled by subpoena. You're here today under duress. You're here today because of the court ordering it. President Biden issued you a sweeping pardon extending back to 2014.
Oh, I wonder why.
The same pardon he gave to his son, Hunter. A pardon may protect a person from criminal prosecution, doesn't rewrite history. It does not erase documents. It does not convert a misleading statement into a truthful one. And it does not prevent Congress from establishing what happened. There will be another pandemic. There will be another crisis. And there will again be officials who insist that uncertainty must be hidden for the public's own good. They will demand obedience. They will invoke science. I am the science, as though it were a commandment. They will argue that government officials cannot be questioned because questioning them would undermine public trust. They have it backwards. It is secrecy that destroys trust. It is arrogance that destroys trust.
Look, the
It is
public doesn't trust the
censorship
government,
that
full
destroys
stop.
trust. And it is the refusal to admit error that destroys trust. That loss of trust may be your most damaging legacy. Trust can't be ordered. It has to be earned. No scientist is above scrutiny. No government official is beyond accountability. And no public servant has the right to treat the suffering of millions of Americans as a footnote to his preferred version of history. I now recognize Senator Peters for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee has a long and a very proud history of conducting serious oversight on behalf of the American people. When this committee has been at its best, Democrats and Republicans have worked together to investigate complicated issues, to follow the facts wherever they may lead, and produce recommendations that actually strengthen our nation's security and improve government functions. That bipartisan tradition has produced meaningful work following Hurricane Katrina, the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, failures at the Secret Service, and countless other matters. Unfortunately, today's hearing is the latest step in the chairman's sharp departure from that long tradition. This hearing appears to be a culmination of months of biased and selected efforts by the majority under the guise of a committee investigation to basically legitimize a predetermined conclusion that was reached years ago. In 2021, the chairman has called for today's witness to be fired, to be arrested, accused him of leading cover-ups and conspiracies. He has even featured the witness prominently in fundraising emails and on the cover of his book. He has also called for the cancellation of the witness's security detail, despite the fact the witness and his family have received numerous credible death threats. When I served as chairman, Senator Paul and I launched a bipartisan biosecurity investigation that included oversight of risky research and the origins of COVID-19, because we agreed that the committee's work would be stronger if we did it in a bipartisan manner and just followed the facts. That was and continues to be an area of legitimate and certainly needed oversight. As chairman, Senator Paul has taken the opposite approach. He has abandoned longstanding practice by blocking minority participation in committee oversight actions and has chosen to selectively release committee records that the minority has never had any access to in order to support his pre-drawn conclusions. The chairman has repeatedly excluded committee's minority and withheld documents and evidence from members that are entitled to receive them, disregarding longstanding Senate rules and committee precedent that have preserved the credibility of our oversight in this committee for decades. I have raised these concerns directly with the chairman because it's not just what we investigate that matters, but how we conduct that investigation. That also matters. One-sided investigations designed to validate predetermined conclusions do not serve the American people who sent us to actually uncover the truth and to solve problems. I wrote to the chairman requesting that he adhere to committee rules. But instead of addressing concerns that I raised, he removed part of the committee's website from the public view. This move not only prevented the public from being able to view those list of concerns, it adds serious questions about the desire for transparency and
Slimy.
legitimate oversight of this matter. But what makes today's hearing particularly disappointing is not simply the chairman's actions, but what we could be using this committee's true and time, oversight, responsibilities to accomplish. This committee has not held its annual threats hearing at all in this Congress. We have not held a budget hearing for the Department of Homeland Security. There are important hearings that we would have the opportunity to discuss as to how to strengthen our Homeland Security across the board. No hearings on those topics. Instead of focusing on the national security challenges that we are facing in our country right now, today's hearing looks backwards, revisiting questions this committee has already examined, including through bipartisan work that Senator Paul and I conducted together when I served as chairman of this committee. But rather than building on that work to strengthen our preparedness against future disasters, we are instead relitigating the past. COVID-19 exposed serious deficiencies in our nation's public health infrastructure. We know that. More than 1 million Americans lost their lives, and this committee should absolutely continue to examine how we can better prepare our nation against future biological threats.
By not allowing snakes like these to ever receive pardons. If you work in this type of field where you're developing vaccines and stuff like that, there not only should be full transparency, not just with the people, with the government, but you should also be unable to ever receive a pardon because of people like this, because of snakes, little weasels like Fauci.
Those are the kinds of forward-looking, life-saving questions that will help our nation be better prepared to protect the health and the safety of Americans when the next emergency occurs. Unfortunately, at this precise moment, we should be strengthening our capabilities. The Trump administration seems to be doing everything in their power to actually weaken our capabilities. The administration has hollowed out the public health workforce. They have fired, pushed out, and cut funding for public health personnel, shrinking the CDC workforce by a quarter. Thousands of experienced scientists have left government service, and with them has gone critical institutional knowledge that cannot be easily replaced, certainly not quickly replaced. The administration, thanks to political operatives like Russell Vought, has slashed or illegally withheld funding for life-saving medicines and cutting-edge technologies that let us rapidly develop them during an emergency. Mr. Vought is now further politicizing the federal grant-making process, proposing to subject all federal grants, including those for disaster relief, housing development, and cancer research, to the whims of political appointees, not nonpartisan experts. All of this has left the American people more vulnerable to infectious disease threats, and we are already tragically seeing the consequences. Staffing and funding cuts have slowed the federal, state, and local response to ongoing outbreak of a foodborne parasite, which has sickened thousands in my home state of Michigan, as well as across the country. At the same time, the administration cuts to global health programs and international partnerships have greatly reduced our ability to contain dangerous diseases like Ebola before they spread to our shores. We should be examining whether our federal health agencies have the personnel and the resources they need to effectively prevent, detect, and respond to these threats. We should be asking how to strengthen our biodefense efforts to deter our adversaries and prevent biological attacks against our country, and how our government can better coordinate and communicate during public health emergencies. These are the kinds of forward-looking matters that are worthy of this committee's time. Instead, we are here continuing the chairman's year-long focus on one individual. History tells us, unfortunately, another pandemic is all but inevitable. The question is whether Congress,
Especially whenever
and
you
this
create them.
committee, will work to better prepare our country for it, or continue looking backward while our public health infrastructure crumbles around us. That is the hearing that we should be having today. Unfortunately, I fear the intent of this hearing is only meant to further a purely partisan agenda and it will not make Americans safer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The accusation that the committee has denied access to the minority to records is categorically false. This is the most transparent investigation in the history of Congress. We actually created a website, and we put all of the information on the website. It continues to operate. The reason it hasn't been accessed is no Democrat ever signed up for it. Not one Democrat. We told them the access. They never asked for the access code. They haven't been on the website because they have not cared about the investigation. It's a practice of this committee to swear in the witness. Dr. Fauci, please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Dr. Anthony Fauci, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Let that sink in. This, I don't even know what to call him, just raised his right hand in a court of law and swore before God that he's about to tell the whole truth. Yet the entire way through this, I haven't seen it all, but I've seen most of the questioning through clips. He refuses to repeatedly answer, citing the Fifth Amendment, something he's not entitled to because he received a pardon. This is the type of filth that you're dealing with. So let's go ahead and hear this absolute nonsense.
Member Peters, members of the committee, I served at the NIH for over 54 years, 38 of those as director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Over that period, I proved that I believe in and respect the value of legitimate congressional oversight. In fact, I testified before and/or briefed Senate and House Senate and House committees well over 200 times over those 38 years. During and after the COVID pandemic, I have appeared multiple times for hearings in the Senate and the House, usually under oath, and sat for several days-long transcribed sworn interviews, answering questions about the very issues that are now the subject of this hearing. However, given Senator Paul's obvious obsession with calling for my prosecution, his repeated slanderous comments about me, and
What's the slander? You can't just say slander. What is the slander? Name it.
recently his publicly releasing my unredacted personal diary aimed
That's not slander.
at embarrassing and intimidating me, the only conclusion I can reach is that the sole reason he is calling me before this committee is to get me to say something, anything, that could vindicate his repeated public pledges that I end up, in his words, quote, behind bars, unquote.
If it was down to me, you wouldn't be behind bars.
Any reasonable person who has followed his unhinged obsession with me would readily come to the same conclusion. Therefore, although it pains me to do so, because of the respect I have for the legislative branch of government and my decades-long record of cooperating with Congress, under the advice of my attorneys, I will invoke my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution to
You don't have
refrain
that
from
right.
answering your questions. Thank you.
We will now begin a round of questioning. Dr. Fauci, your testimony today is compelled by a lawful subpoena. As you know, it's a crime under 18 U.S.C. Section 1001 to knowingly make a material false statement to Congress, with a penalty up to 5 years of imprisonment. Understanding that you are under oath, the American people would like to understand your reasoning, your rationale for why you chose to fund the research in Wuhan. There have been, intelligence agencies, the CIA, the FBI, the DOE, have all come to the conclusion that more likely than not, the virus came from the lab in Wuhan. And so we'd like to know, what was the rationale? What was the discussion? How, what went behind the decision to fund the research in Wuhan? How did you come to the conclusion that a totalitarian country would be capable of doing this in a BSL-2 lab, a lab that lacked the security? What was the reasoning? And are you sorry, basically, for making the decision? Would you, given another chance, say, well, gosh, circumstances now, as I know it, maybe it wasn't a wise thing. Can you explain to the committee why you chose to fund this dangerous research in China?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based
Snake.
upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
In the red folder on your table is a copy of Section 192 of Title II of the U.S. Code. Your counsel has been provided a copy as well. That section makes it a crime for a witness appearing under subpoena to refuse to answer any questions pertinent to the question under inquiry. Do you have that in front of you?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
Let the record record that the witness has refused to answer whether there's a folder in front of him based on his Fifth Amendment right. It is true that you're appearing under direction of our subpoena to provide testimony on matters under consideration by the committee, including the origins of COVID-19, risky life sciences research, and your tenure as a federal government employee. Additionally, you've been provided a full and unconditional pardon dated January 9th, 2025.
Yeah,
for any
I'm not
offenses
surprised.
against
And
the
I
United
saw
States
multiple
which may have
times
been
throughout the
committed
clip.
or
It's
taken part
infuriating.
from January 1st, 2014 through the date of the pardon for a 10-year period, arising from or in any manner related to your service as director of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, as a member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force, or the White House COVID-19 response team, or as chief medical advisor to the president. Have you refused this pardon, or do you have any reason to believe this full and unconditional pardon, this grant of immunity, would somehow require you to plead the Fifth Amendment?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
Based on the facts presented, I'm going to direct you to answer the questions. The committee has issued a valid subpoena. They have requested your presence here. The questions are very pertinent to your decision-making as head of NIAID, as well as a chief advisor to the president. Do you still refuse to answer the questions?
Hey, Sam.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
You don't have any rights.
Let's do the, Dr. Fauci, were you ever made aware of gain-of-function research on monkeypox being conducted at the National Biodefense Analysis and Countermeasure Center and back at Fort Detrick.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
Dr. Fauci, did the CIA ever transfer funds to NIH under an interagency agreement?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
I'm going to, but I need the long list of the gain function questions. Dr. Fauci, did the NIH ever conduct research for or in coordination with any element of the intelligence community, CIA, ODNI?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
The reason why these questions are important is, President Trump has done a ban, and we're glad that he did a ban on gain-of-function research. So we're better off than we were when we had an advocate serving as head of NIAID, an advocate for gain-of-function research. There is still, though, a question, though, whether or not the intelligence community is adhering to that order. There's a question of whether or not gain-of-function research is still ongoing. And these are important questions the American people deserve to know. Dr. Fauci, have you been read into any classified Department of Homeland Security program, any prospective special access program concerning gain-of-function research?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
When we look at the research in China, the gain-of-function research that you've denied was gain-of-function, one of the things that startled the scientists when they saw COVID in the first couple of weeks was when they looked at the sequence of it, they said, oh my God, there's a furin cleavage site in it. And in this particular family of coronaviruses, the sarbecoviruses, they'd never seen this before. They were also startled to look at it and see how it was coded for, what the codons were, and to discover that the codons used out of 36 different possibilities turned out to be the one that was commonly used in gene manipulation by scientists. Dr. Fauci, were the scientists at the Wuhan Institute of Virology capable of inserting a furin cleavage site into a coronavirus?
Of course they were. This is the thing. He knows it. Fauci knows it. Everyone knows it. It was manipulated. That's exactly what they were doing at those labs. It had nothing to do with animal outbreaks or, bats in a market. It was a manufactured virus.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
So one of the experiments that was pretty common was they would take the backbone of a SARS virus, and this would be a SARS virus that the backbone itself wasn't that dangerous, but then they would dig through guano, 300 feet underground, bat guano. They'd find other viruses, unknown viruses. They'd take the S protein off of an unknown virus and stick it on a backbone. And then they would infect mice that have humanized cells. And they were trying to discover if they could create a virus that infects humans. Now, many people would say, well, gosh, that doesn't sound like a really good idea to create viruses that don't exist in nature to see if they'll infect human cells. What if one escaped? What if you keep infecting this and do serial passage, you actually adapt the virus to be infectious to humans? So the question is whether or not, Dr. Fauci, the Wuhan Institute of Virology was combining an S protein with one virus with the backbone of others, and could this lead to a virus, maybe it wasn't even predicted, but could it lead to viruses that gained in function and then could lead to a pandemic?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
One of the arguments that you and others have made against this virus coming from the lab is it couldn't have come from the viruses that have been published. And nobody's really arguing that. I think from the very beginning, people acknowledged that the viruses that have been published are too far evolutionarily distant from a virus that could have become COVID-19. But what has never been acknowledged by the side who tries to call the other side of conspiracy theory, which is really something you don't usually see in a scientific debate. This is the first time I've ever seen an article printed.
Also, not to mention the fact that just because something is a conspiracy doesn't mean that it's not truthful. Something can be a conspiracy because the truth is actually not yet out there, but just labeling it a conspiracy to do away with it, yeah, that doesn't work.
In Lancet by your friends who called this a conspiracy theory. You know, these are the kind of things you see as a screed on a political, website. You don't really see this in science. But when they release this as being a conspiracy theory, we're wondering that when you do this, when you combine these viruses and are able to grow them in humanized cells, whether or not this kind of risky research, whether you call it gain of function or not, whether you use the definition of gain of function, whether this kind of research should have had more scrutiny. I think in your House testimony, you testified that you never traveled to China and that you were unaware that anybody at NIH ever examined the labs, that you trusted the Chinese scientists. I think you said that even recently, that with your discretion, you trusted the Chinese scientists. The problem is that even in our country, we trust our scientists. They're good American scientists, probably doing the right thing for America. But at the same time, we oversight to make sure it's not dangerous research, but we also investigate the lab. I believe Fort Detrick was
Remove this from science and vaccines for a moment. You can trust someone even in your personal life, but if something has significance beyond you and them, like it's going to affect other people, doesn't matter how much trust you place in them, you still oversee things. So really silly example, but I trust my editor. I told him to do whatever he wants with my videos, um inject his personality into them, which he's been doing, and to be honest, it's quite funny. I hope you guys will enjoy it the more you see it. But as much freedom as he has, he knows there's boundaries. I've told him there's certain things he cannot do, which he wouldn't even want to do anyway. But he knows that while he has my trust, while he has freedom, he cannot abuse that freedom because I oversee it. If this is something stupid and as silly as YouTube, which by the way still can affect people, because like again, not that he would ever do it, but say for example, he puts in a clip of something that is really vile and horrid and it offends a pile of my audience. Well, where was I during that process? Am I not meant to have oversight over him to make sure, hey, yeah, look, that's good to go? Of course I am, because it goes beyond me just trusting him. There's a mutual trust. He has freedom, but he doesn't have freedom to abuse things. Now, if that's something as simple as YouTube, think about this. So saying, oh, I trusted the Chinese scientists and, I just let them do it. Heck no.
one of our main labs was closed down in the last year or two because of, research institute, a research incident that was dangerous with dangerous pathogens. And so the American people would want to know, how could you approve this dangerous research in China, say that you trusted the Chinese scientists, and then in the end, you had to admit that you'd never been there, and none of your inspectors had ever been there. Dr. Fauci, had any of the labs where this dangerous research was occurring, were any American lab oversight or lab investigators, did they ever appear in these labs to make sure that they were safe labs?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
I'm going to get very
So one
infuriated
of the
here in
main
this line.
theories for those who have looked at this being created in the lab was the idea that could have come from a virus not previously published. Dr. Fauci, are you aware that Dr. Shi, who worked for the Wuhan Institute of Virology, was said to, and I think in her own words, to have over 100 viruses that had not been previously published that could have been a close enough relative to create COVID-19? Are you aware of that?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Under your testimony previously, when you denied ever having funded gain of function in China, it was so adamant as to be striking, to leave no room for any interpretation of what is or isn't gain of function research. But there's another important question. Did you fund gain of function research in other biolabs around the world?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
The one research project that we do know you did fund is the one that Ron Fauci did. And it's important to talk about because this sort of was the beginning of the debate over gain of function. And this wasn't just me. I wasn't even aware of the debate 10 years ago. This was other scientists. Over 200 scientists at the Cambridge Working Group signed a protest because they didn't think you should fund the research, and they didn't think it should even be published because it was sort of a roadmap as to how to make a bioweapon. So what they did was the avian flu, and this is important. It may be the most important question we get to here today. The avian flu has about 50% mortality for humans. The good news, though, about animal viruses is they don't infect humans very well. It will infect humans, but doesn't go human to human very well. Ron Fauci, with the money that you provided to him, did an experiment where he caused purposeful mutations to create a new virus, an avian flu that didn't just infect birds well, but actually infected mammals well. Went
'Cause you're playing around with
in
it.
an aerosolized manner. People saw this and were aghast, at the decision-making process that you decided to fund this. But this is when, the debate came about, and you wrote in support of this in the Washington Post, and you said, even if a scientist is bitten, even if a pandemic should occur, the knowledge is worth the risks.
No, it's not.
Do you still stand by that? Would you like to qualify at all whether or not the knowledge of gain of function is worth the risks, particularly in this case, since we now know 15 million people died worldwide? Many people believe this came from the lab. Do you think that the risks really are worth the benefits for gain of function research?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
All right. We're going to finish with this question, and it's based really on that statement, that general statement in your support for gain of function, the idea that the benefits outweigh the risks. So there are many other people who disagree, and they aren't politicians or not, I don't know what party they're in. David Relman is probably one of the most esteemed, and he is a scientist at Stanford. He, I think, has classified clearance. He's been a consultant to our government probably for a decade or more.
Sorry. I know this is a serious topic, but your woman here, we're like, who knows how many files and pages?
And he's written about this publicly. He says the opposite. He said that the risks of this research do not outweigh the benefits. He said the risks, we shouldn't do it. Richard E. Bright, who's been involved in this debate for 2 decades, says the same thing. Says we really shouldn't be doing this at all. There's a quote also by, the Kevin Esfelt quote, is that at the very end?
Cameraman was too slow in panning out there.
Kevin Esfelt, who's a CRISPR scientist at MIT, also wrote about this gain of function. I implore every scientist, funder, and nation working in the field, please stop. No more trying to discover or make pandemic-capable viruses. No more experiments likely to disseminate blueprints for plagues. Dr. Fauci, would you like to at least answer this one question for us today?
Of course you won't.
And let us know whether or not you've changed your mind on whether or not the benefits of gain of function research outweigh the risks.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
The chairman has denied your assertion of privilege and directed you to answer, but you nonetheless refuse and stand on privilege despite the existence of the pardon. The committee will have to consider after this hearing what appropriate action should be taken against you for the failure to testify after being directed to do so. It's against the law to obstruct an investigation of Congress, there will be repercussions to your refusal to testify
This little
today.
weasel doesn't care.
Senator Peters. You're not recognized. You're not recognized. If you are unruly, you will be removed from the proceeding. You are not recognized, and you are not recognized, sir. Sir, you are not recognized. You are not recognized.
He's not recognized.
Security.
Just in case you guys didn't get
We'll
that,
hold
he's
off.
not recognized.
But you will respect these proceedings. You were told not to sit at the table. You insist on sitting at the table, and we told you you would not be recognized. You are not invited here for testimony, sir. You are being disruptive. Would you behave this way in a courtroom? No, because the judge would put you in jail. I can't do that today, but I can have you escorted from the premises. So I would say, sir, sit quietly and don't say another word. I said, sit quietly. You are not recognized. Another word.
That's one word for him. I have a few more that I can't say because of terms of service. But
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to
he has
hear,
a card,
what
and
the attorney has
he
to
should
say.
be
He is not recognized
lawfully
by the
dealt
committee
with,
or the
but
chair. If he speaks
very
again,
extremely.
he will be removed from the room. This testimony is from Anthony Fauci. This is not a game with his lawyers. He can advise. His lawyers can give him advice. He's got a half dozen here. They're all allowed to talk to him.
Yes.
All right?
Yeah.
But the attorney.
Of course, he would have a half dozen with him. Why? Because there's still a lot of money behind him. Not his personal money, but there's a lot of people that don't want certain things to come out, certain people's involvement. So, of course, there will be privately funded lawyers there to help guide him while he just constantly repeats that he's trying to invoke his Fifth Amendment right. Now, I'm Irish, I'm not American, so I could be wrong with this, but everything I've looked up and everything that I've even heard here, he is not entitled to his Fifth Amendment right anymore because he received a full pardon.
Attorneys are not recognized. In fact, the attorney was told not to sit at the table, and he's not obeying that recommendation. There's a row behind you, sir. That's where you were told to sit, and you're not. And
Yes,
now you're
I
disrupting
agree.
the proceedings. And so, look, this is the way Anthony Fauci wants to be remembered, for a lawyer not listening to the rules. That's the way you want to be remembered, and that's what you're going to do. You are not recognized, sir. Security, please remove him from the room.
That's it, lad. Get him out of here. That should have been done a long time ago. Meanwhile, your woman with all the files is finally leaving.
Let the record state that Dr. Fauci will still have the advice of the other half a dozen attorneys that he brought along today. Senator Peters.
I like this dude.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The COVID-19 pandemic is not the first or the last public health crisis to impact our nation. In December 2022, I released a report that identified significant failures in our federal government's preparedness and initial response to COVID-19. This report contained 17 key findings. It's a very large report, which I have right here. It contains 17 key findings and corresponding recommendations, including the need to invest in sustainable domestic manufacturing capabilities for critical medical supplies, build the infrastructure needed to surge testing capacity for infectious diseases, and robustly fund public health emergency preparedness and responses across all levels of government. Unfortunately, multiple administrations, including the current Trump administration, have failed to fund or to reform our health preparedness. This is something that I would hope the committee in the future would investigate. It needs to be taken a look at. It also feels like a new public health threat is hitting us every month. There's a foodborne parasite affecting thousands of people in Michigan and across the country, and our federal agencies still haven't fully pinned down the source of that outbreak. Measles cases in this country are at the highest they've been in 35 years. More
I
children
think
are
you're
getting
right,
sick
sir.
and
I
even
don't think that guy
hospitalized
was
from
recognized.
this preventable disease. Over 1,000 people have died from the Ebola virus in Africa, and we don't know how widespread this crisis actually is. We have a hantavirus scare on a cruise ship, and though it hasn't made headlines in the way that the screwworm threatening our food security has,
Now, let me just say this. I don't know how many people actually remember. I think it was maybe like a month or two ago. It wasn't actually all that long ago. They were trying to scare people into the idea if there had been another pandemic that was currently contained on a cruise ship. Do you notice how quickly that disappeared out of the public eye because of how many people, especially on social media, especially X, were saying, yeah, not this time. We ain't believing it. We're not being locked up. We're not doing social distancing. We're not doing all of this stuff, which, by the way, has been shown repeatedly now since the whole I don't know what I can say on YouTube if the live gets taken down, it's taken down, but the whole C-19 thing, all of that nonsense, like they eventually admitted it. They were like, yeah, this was all, there was no real science behind it. We kind of invented the rules as we went. The, what do you call them? The World Economic Forum also came out and said that the entire C-19 thing was specifically designed to see uh, how well people would follow it in case of a real pandemic. Now think about that. They admit, you can go on to the World Economic Forum and search this yourself. They admit that it wasn't a real pandemic, that it was designed in order to see how susceptible people were. Yet where's the outrage over that? Don't get me wrong, a lot of people are annoyed, a lot of people are upset, but we really do not show as much outrage as we should. People like Fauci, again, I can't say what I would like to do because of TOS, but
remain concerned about bird flu that is also spreading and could one day cause a pandemic. This is also something this committee should be investigating and holding hearings on. Since January 2025, the Trump administration has taken a number of actions to drastically weaken our ability to fight infectious diseases and biological threats that endanger Americans. These actions are both incomprehensible and are also inexcusable. They include slashing funding for public health and infectious disease research, canceling contracts for cutting-edge vaccine technology, shutting agencies responsible for tackling infectious diseases around the world, firing thousands of federal employees with keeping our communities and our medicines and our food supply safe, and injecting political appointees in what should be non-political grant-making functions. That is something this committee should be looking at. I could go on. I could go on all the topics that we need to be looking at moving forward to protect this country. We're not doing that in this committee. That's what this committee was designed to do. It's what it has done throughout history.
here's what should be done to protect. Guys like him, Fauci, should never ever, I don't care their qualifications, I don't care anything else. From now on, whenever you have a guy that's, overseeing vaccines, that guy should never ever be legally entitled to a pardon. Never. If you're going to be involved in creating vaccines or, whatever you want to call it, because it wasn't actually a vaccine, you need to basically surrender your rights to public scrutiny. Now, that may sound harsh to a lot of people, but it's just the truth. Because whenever you look at what was done here, people were forcibly made to take that jag. Just because they weren't physically forced doesn't mean they weren't forced. A lot of people were under threat of losing job, ostracized from friends and families. Even churches fell into it and tried to bind the conscience and say that to not take it is to not love your neighbor. All serious, serious abuses that need to be dealt with. Praise the Lord for pastors that stood up against this nonsense and said, no, you are not binding the conscience of my congregation. Jobs that tried to out people from their job for not taking an experimental jag, should be boycotted and let go bankrupt. I don't care how big of a corporation they are. I don't care how fundamental they are to your local city, whatever it is. They should be boycotted. They should have hell to pay, because what they put people through was absolute hell. And people today are still suffering the consequences of it. The weird thing is, that time period literally feels like at most maybe 2 years ago. But we're in 2026. That took place 2019, 2020. Just think about that. We're almost like, we're closer to it being a decade on than we are from when it began. Yet that is so etched in people's minds because of how much genuine abuse people were put through: mental, psychological, social. It destroyed people's lives, and people are still recovering today. That's why things like this should not be taken lightly. This little hearing, nothing's actually going to happen to this little weasel. He's received his pardon. But that's why I say guys like this shouldn't be eligible for pardons. I don't care whether it comes from the president or not, shouldn't be eligible.
It has done it in a bipartisan way. We should get back to that and think about the future of this country and keeping this country safe. When a crisis like COVID-19 strikes, we have an obligation to examine what went right and what went wrong to provide accountability for the American people. Congress certainly has done that. Between the House and Senate, nearly 20 different committees, including this committee, as I mentioned, have conducted oversight of the COVID-19 pandemic, conducting transcribed interviews, holding dozens of hearings, and released more than 10 reports. Today's exercise, unfortunately, is a stark departure from those largely bipartisan, legitimate efforts. The chairman has shut the minority out of participating equally in these efforts, withheld information, selectively released documents, actions that completely undermine the credibility of this investigation. I will enter a record without objection, Mr. Chairman, a letter that I sent to you that detailed all of those areas that we have concern with and where we were shut out.
Without objection.
We'll provide other details as well. I think today's hearing, unfortunately, does real damage. It's tempting to turn one person into the scapegoat for a crisis that hundreds of officials across both the Trump and the Biden administration were responsible for handling. And it does so in a way that people that are facing death threats. This is only going to, unfortunately, deter other scientific experts from public service to understand that this is what they would have to go through as they provide their advice to us. We're not going to make our nation safer, and I hope that we can restore by doing these kinds of activities, and I hope that we can restore our legitimate bipartisan oversight that's going to help strengthen our public health and pandemic preparedness and other homeland priorities. That's what this committee needs to focus on. It hasn't the last year and a half. Let's hope it does in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Fauci, I hope the American people listen very carefully to Chairman Paul's opening statement. I think it's a stunning indictment of the actions you've taken that have been so destructive to global health. I certainly understand why you needed a pardon. I certainly understand why, on the advice of counsel, you're not answering any questions, because I think it'd be almost impossible for you to answer the questions truthfully without really demonstrating what you did, your culpability, self-incriminating. We have, all of us, has prepared a lot. I've been
Yeah. Where was the care and concern for citizens who received, I can't say the word, threats for not getting the JAG? Sorry, I don't know why I air quoted the word JAG there. I was thinking the word you said. Yeah. Didn't matter. Doesn't matter to them. What mattered was control, power, and money. The people that were behind this are people that think they are God. That's the simple truth of it. They think they are God. They think they can play with people's lives and destroy it.
Deluged with questions to ask Dr. Anthony Fauci. There are so many legitimate questions that deserve answers, and now you're not willing to provide those answers. So with my limited time, I'm going to talk about things that my investigation have revealed that have not been adequately answered and, quite honestly, haven't been adequately covered by the legacy media. I'll kind of combine the questions into kind of one, but you know, I certainly let's.
Let me just say this. In regards to legacy media, if you still use legacy media to get your news, I don't know what to tell you. You're swallowing propaganda hook, line, and sinker. You should be getting your news. Don't get me wrong, everywhere has bias. But if you are getting your news from places like BBC, Fox News, CNN, whatever else, all the major news companies, they have particular leans, not only for their investors, for their private backers, for the audience they've already catered. You need to be getting your news from a vast variety of news outlets, independent news outlets. And you need to gather your news from a collective rather than one source. And you need to use your own critical thinking skills to try and put two and two together. It's actually not that hard. But yet, the amount of people in my own life, especially here in Ireland, that watch the BBC and will just parrot and repeat whatever the BBC says without any critical thinking. The BBC could put out a news report tonight that seagulls are now military tanks in the sky that have been militarily created and they're drone operated. There are people in Ireland that would buy that hook, line, and sinker because they just believe that the news means, oh, this is factual. Do not use legacy media. If you're on X, X is a great place of news. X is also a great place of misinformation because people can post whatever the heck they want. But again, you need to get your news from multiple places. And on X, there is multiple places where you can and will hear the truth. But you have to put it together. You have to do some work, but it's worth it.
Put up the last COVID chart. I was warned pretty early on about the dangers of the experimental gene therapy that you've called a vaccine, but it really falls under the definition of gene therapy. So
He's right.
I was going to ask you, I mean, were you carefully monitoring the safety surveillance systems like VAERS and vSafe that literally were deluged with complaints? You know, currently, worldwide, there have been almost 1.7 million adverse events reported to the VAERS system. Of those, over 39,000 were deaths. And of those deaths, 24% occur on the day of vaccination within 1 or 2 days. 24%, which, by the way, just happens to be the same percentage that a Rasmussen poll pointed out the American public believe 24% of the American public believe they know somebody who died of the experimental gene therapy. So again, I was certainly interested in asking you whether or not you were following this as carefully as I was. It's not my responsibility to follow safety surveillance systems, but I did. And by the way, when I published, this is actual government information. When I published it and people had me on their shows, they would be censored by Facebook. They would be deplatformed. I think
Correct.
largely at the behest of the actions you took to make sure that disinformation wasn't spread. This wasn't disinformation. This was the truth. So I was going to ask you whether you knew Dr. Marks. I think you do know him. He's the head of CBER. He's the man who is in charge of approving vaccines and surveilling for the safety. My investigation shows that on March 1st of 2021, less than 3 months after the emergency use authorizations, he was warned by Dr. Anna Scharsman, data mining expert, that the algorithm they were using to analyze VAERS data was going to hide in and mass safety signals.
Let me just pause that for a moment just so you guys can take that in. I know it's been up there for a while, but just look at that. Look at ivermectin. Do you remember whenever they told you that this was not good? That ivermectin was not safe? That it was only for animals? That it didn't help at all? Then look at what they told you you should take. I don't know if my mouse is highlighting that on the screen. I think it is. I'm awful with pronunciation of names because I'm dyslexic, but remdesivir or whatever it is. Just look at that. Adverse effects 10,657. Deaths 2,751. And by the way, that's only what was actually reported. Deaths per year 546. Then look at ivermectin. Adverse effects. And by the way, this would have been people that were taking it wrong doses because they heard the truth that it actually helps combat this. Their doctors wouldn't prescribe it and they went and got it themselves through other means, took it, and they would have had adverse effects. Look at their deaths 518. Look at their deaths per year 17. Do you know why this was pushed to you? And ivermectin was, you were told ivermectin was bad, don't do it, it's wrong. Do you know why this was pushed? Think about it. Because it helps them out. If you can't take any ivermectin or anything else over the counter to help with it, you have to take what they prescribe. This is how much this entire thing was such a wicked and just, I have to be very careful with what I say because I'm on YouTube, but this entire thing was planned and controlled throughout. They deplatformed anyone that was talking about ivermectin. Joe Rogan brought it up. They tried to cancel Rogan, but Rogan has such a massive platform on his own. It's impossible to cancel Rogan because he's not under any corporation. He's not under any other thing like Facebook or anything that can take him down. Joe Rogan was one of the few people during this that was bringing guests on, other doctors, other scientists that were saying, yeah, go get some ivermectin. Make sure you get it from a safe source, of course. But they told you, this works. But what does legacy media do? They push what people behind the whole C19 thing wanted to push. Why? Because they're all part of it. It's a controlled narrative. If you think legacy media gives you actual good information, I'm sorry to say it, but you're a legit fool.
26 days later and 3 months consecutively after that, they did data runs with a new algorithm that unmasked those safety signals. They showed dozens of safety signals, including sudden cardiac death, cerebral artery occlusion, basal ganglia stroke, agonal rhythm, Bell's palsy, and pulmonary infarction. Your diaries now show that you actually suffered pulmonary infarction in, I think, probably June 2021. I was just wondering whether it ever went through your mind that maybe that injection, all those boosters you took, might have caused that. You know, and the question I was going to, and I'll ask this question: were you ever made aware of the fact that Peter Marks was warned that the algorithm was going to hide the safety signals? And were you told that senior FDA officials were given shown dozens of safety signals associated with the COVID injection?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Next area I want to go through is in that same month of March 2021, an employee at NIH, Dr. Nath, led a team of researchers who were diagnosing and treating individuals who'd never had COVID but were severely injured by the genetic therapy injections. Dr. Nath told those individuals, stay quiet. We want to make sure that we gather all the information and then release it to doctors so they can treat people like yourself. There was a concerted effort, and I'll enter this in the record. It appears inside NIH to quash Dr. Nath's publishing of that study. It finally was put on a preprint server with telling no one, and I think about May of 2022. I think what's noteworthy about this is Dr. Nath told the injured participants that early treatment, early intervention was crucial for them to be treated. And yet within the NIH, they were questioning what was Dr. Nath doing. They didn't want to publish that because, and I want to take time searching for it, because publishing it would create vaccine hesitancy, which is what we continue to hear time and time again, is the reason they didn't promote, they lied about the safety signals they were seeing. Throughout the pandemic, I always pushed early treatment. We've got things in here where you were really concerned about remdesivir because it was untested, but hydroxychloroquine, yeah, it was an approved drug. Maybe some safety issues, but we had a great deal of experience with it. All of a sudden, you had the Surgisphere study that was retracted within 2 weeks because it was completely false, totally blew up the use of hydroxychloroquine. And then when it comes to ivermectin, which, by the way, because I was contacted by so many people, I referred them to doctors who actually had the courage and compassion to treat vaccine-injured individuals. It works.
It does work. It always has worked. That's why any information in the beginning that was put out saying that it doesn't work, that it's dangerous, it's only for animals, propaganda. Why? They didn't want you treating it via ivermectin. They wanted you to buy their vaccine, buy their drugs. That's what they wanted.
But I was going to ask you whether you were involved in the FDA attack on ivermectin. You had a interview on CNN on August 29th of 2021, where, again, I just don't want to take time to find the exact quote, but you said there's no evidence that ivermectin is helpful. On that exact same day, and I've got the studies right here. There was a website that was tracking the random controlled studies. Here they are, showing 60, 70% efficacy of ivermectin. The same day you say there's no evidence, there was all kinds of evidence. Loved ones had to go to hospitals, had to sue hospitals. Just, would you try it? So I would want to know, to what extent were you involved in sabotaging hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and did you do that because you knew the only way you get an emergency use authorization for these drugs, these experimental gene therapy, was if there was no effective treatment, you couldn't get the emergency use authorization. So is that why you helped?
Of course it was. That's exactly what it was about. This is what a lot of this stuff is about. At the end of the day, if you want to get a drug on the market, you want to get a JAG on the market, well, it's no good to you if you've got drugs already out there that are competing with you, that are readily available to people, that have years of research behind them. That's the point. Whenever people were forced to take these JAGs, again, I don't know why I'm air quoting the word JAGs, it's because I keep thinking of the V word. The reason why they had to be given emergency use powers is because there was no testing behind it. Normally, drugs have to go years of study before they're widespread out to the public, because you have to know, is there any long-term effects, any short-term effects? This crew didn't care. Fauci and his crew didn't care. And to what extent was he involved? Massive. If you remember any of the media from back then, which I'm sure is etched into a lot of your minds, Fauci was one of the main people shouting from the rooftops how dangerous ivermectin is. There's no proof that ivermectin works. Little weaselly.
Sabotage these cheap generic drugs in favor of remdesivir, which, by the way, nurses, are you aware of the fact that nurses called it "run, death is near"?
That's a good name for it.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully
Always is,
decline
Sam.
to answer
Always
based
is.
upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
But let me end on this note, because this just came to light. You know, we've got 11 million pages of documents. We also have other people who were in the room. But now you actually lied to your own diary. On March 27, 2020, you wrote in your diary, "To my surprise yesterday, the POTUS sent a letter to governors outlining a plan to reopen county by county while monitoring the spread of virus in low-risk counties. This was half-baked and never shown to Deb or I before it was sent out." So we have evidence that, in fact, you were fully aware of it.
Of course he
and certainly
was.
Proved if not authored it. So I was just simply asking you, I mean, is that true? I mean, did you literally lie to your own diary? Did you know of that letter?
He knew it was
sent
going to
out
come out.
governors about reopening county by county? And again, Mr. Chairman, I'd ask you to ask the witness to just answer that one simple question.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
You don't have any rights.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hassan.
Thank you. Dr. Fauci, I want to start by thanking you for more than 50 years of service to this country at the National Institutes of Health.
I wouldn't be thanking him.
And it is unfortunate that you have been put in the position that you are in today. And it must be enormously frustrating to know that this hearing is designed to entrap you. It must be very frustrating for your attorneys to hear the chair's mischaracterization of the legal issues and posture that impact your decisions at the witness table today.
I can't see because of this here, but Senator Hassan, is that? Anybody in the comments know who this is?
Meanwhile, I was going to ask you a series of questions about things that are relevant right now to the people of the United States about the state of public health in this country. Since President Trump took office in 2025, more than 4,500 cases of measles have been reported. That is more cases in the year and a half since Donald Trump has been president than were reported from 2000 to 2024 combined. Children are dying because there has been increased vaccine hesitancy, fueled by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and frankly, his entire administration. Thousands of people in the United States of America have been sickened by a foodborne parasite, and the outbreak is nowhere near under control, as staffing at the FDA and other critical public health entities has been slashed by Russell Vought and Elon Musk. Last year, the National Institutes of Health
Oh no, the big bad boogeyman, Elon Musk.
awarded 201 fewer grants compared to the previous years. 207, I am corrected, compared to previous years. As those grants were either canceled or delays, especially at the beginning of the Trump administration, I can tell my colleagues what the impact was on people in New Hampshire, on scientists in New Hampshire, on clinical trials in New Hampshire, where people's cancer treatment was interrupted because Elon Musk and Russell Vought know better, they say, than the people at NIH about.
Bro, How has she got that? Like, where's that come from? The reason why people don't trust vaccines is because people like the little weasel that is in front of her completely undergirded the public's trust. Public don't trust anything to do with the government now in regards to vaccines because of how much secrecy and lies that were involved. But yet she wants to blame someone like Elon Musk. Right.
About what to fund. And because they did some sort of word search, it seems, for some of the grants, and boy, oh boy, if you were studying rural health in New Hampshire and trying to understand how to better engage people who need health care in rural America, that was off the table. America is losing researchers and scientists to other countries because researchers and scientists, highly trained, highly qualified, invested in often by the American taxpayer, are finding the hostility from this administration so strong that it interferes with their science, and they want to pursue science.
Oh, yes, the almighty trust the science. You can't just say the word science and expect people to go, oh, okay. No, science is testable. People like this honestly anger me.
Wherever that science takes them. I also sit on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. We have had a number of hearings with nominees recently to fill critical spots. One of those nominees is Dr. Erica Schwartz, a brilliant woman, medical degree, biomedical engineering degree. I think she also told us she has a law degree and a master's in public health. She was a 2-star admiral in the United States Navy, an experienced doctor. And yet, when I asked her if she would push back at Secretary Kennedy, if he instructed her to suspend the promotion of the flu vaccine as he did some point in the last few months, there's an email to prove it, she couldn't answer that question. She either could not, would not, or had been bullied into.
You mean the way Weasel Boy is would not, could not answer? Is that what you mean?
Evading a question about whether she, as the director of CDC, would stand up to Secretary Kennedy, the most unqualified Secretary of Health and Human Services.
She just sounds like a dripping faucet.
This country has ever seen, and more than unqualified, somebody who pursues conspiracy theories, degrades people with disabilities, and continues to promote disproved science. That's the state of healthcare and public health in this country right now, not to mention the $1 trillion or so of cuts to the Medicaid program that is decimating healthcare in my state and decimating it around the country, not to mention the refusal.
Woman, what are we here to do today? Listen to your bleeding heart story of just propaganda or interrogate the little weasel in front of you? You're just using your time to push your own little agenda. I don't care. I don't care. And whoever the chairman is, I forget his name, he should have told you to get on with it by now.
Of my colleagues and this administration to extend critical tax cuts for people who are trying to afford insurance
Yeah,
on the Affordable
literally.
Care Act. I just was at one of my community health clinics, and they are reporting fewer and fewer people coming in for care, disrupting care because they can no longer afford health insurance. And that is impacting, of course, the revenue stream to the community health clinic, their ability to hire and pay people, their ability to take care of their community. That's what I wish we were having hearings about in this
Well,
committee
we're
and in the
not.
health
So
committee.
shush.
That's what I wish we were trying to address in a bipartisan way. But instead, we are here in an attempt to entrap you because you had a distinguished career trying to put Americans' public health first.
Oh, yeah.
With that, I yield.
Senator Lankford.
You should probably yield your
Sure,
entire
thank you.
job.
Dr. Fauci, thanks for coming today. I know you're invoking your Fifth Amendment right, which you have the right to be able to do constitutionally, but thanks for
He doesn't because of a pardon.
coming and be a part of this. There are a lot of issues and a lot of questions that have come up, and hopefully in some day in the future, we'll be able to get all this clarity to be able to pull together.
Well,
There
we
were over a
won't as
million
long as the
Americans that
weasel
died
refuses
from
to
COVID.
answer.
You know that well. You were tracking the numbers literally every single day, those affected and those that died from the earliest days. There are a lot of lessons that we've got to learn from this, that we should put into history to be able to determine what happens in the future. How do we respond in the future? How do we deal with something like this again? It was uncharted territory for everyone. But I would tell you, countless families, including my own, watched a loved one die behind glass or through a screen because we couldn't get access to them. Children couldn't get to school. People missed their prom or graduation ceremonies. There were lots of things that happened that dramatically changed the future of the country. The mental health issues that we have continued to deal with from the isolation have been profound. Even something as simple as children that wore masks or were around adults wearing masks for all that time.
You mean the masks that literally would never have helped because if it was to do with airborne particles, the mask never could have stopped it anyway. And in fact, you would have been breathing in your own carbon repeatedly. The masks did not work, they did not help. We actually have multiple testimonies now from several doctors and scientists in the hundreds, maybe even thousands, of how the mask would not have helped. And yet they were still pushed. Why? Because it was about control. It was about seeing what you could make the public do.
Are slower in learning language now because they couldn't watch someone's lips moving, and so they're slower in that. Amazingly enough, churches and places of worship were forced to be closed down. There were even churches that met where the pastor preached in the parking lot and the congregants all met in their cars with windows up, and police came and scattered them and said, "You can't be here." The simple act of social distancing became an issue. As everyone guessed, what's the right
It was
distance
control.
to be away from someone else?
It wasn't about social
Literacy rates
distancing,
have
it was
declined.
control.
All these things are results, not to mention the loss of lives and the health experience.
My own government, and it's all forgotten about now because sadly the public over here get enraged for the totality of like 3.8 minutes and then they just forget it. We had politicians in Downing Street having a full on party with alcohol and everything else and food. They stuffed their faces while families were told that they could not enter another family member's house. You had to be part of a social bubble of a number of six, and then it got dropped to four. And meanwhile, Boris Johnson, Matt Hancock, and every other snobby little elite that was in Downing Street at the time, they were all having the time of their life having a party. And in fact, Matt Hancock was using it to have an affair as well. They were so worried about COVID, so worried about social distancing. It's almost like they knew it was a pile of crock. But yet we were expected to social distance, to not meet family and friends. Elderly people were left on their own to care for themselves. You weren't allowed to go into their house to take care of them. And sadly, so many people abided by it. So many. It angers me. It should anger you. It shouldn't be forgot about. We're in 2026. This happened 2019, 2020. And yet, what's happened? What's changed? Our anger's dissipated. It's kind of like, well, it happened. No. These people should be made to pay.
Experiences that have been out there for many Americans. So there are legitimate questions. I wanted to be able to raise some of those, to be able to walk through some of this, because it has been very, very challenging. As we've gone through some of your notes and your diary and other things that are out there, we're trying to be able to pull bits and pieces of things to be able to learn lessons. On May the 6th, 2020, you wrote at that time, I had a conversation with Robert Redfield, who, as you know well, was then the director of CDC, about the fact that greater than 1 million children worldwide have missed their measles vaccination because of the shutdown. You stated, this is terrible and needs to be addressed, since on that basis alone, there would be far more excess deaths from measles among children than coronavirus deaths among children. I need to bring this up to the TF, the task force. Did you ever have an opportunity to bring up the potential of measles deaths among children and an infection rate going around the world from measles, based on the fact that so many children would not get their measles vaccine because of the shutdown?
I'm sorry, Senator, but on the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
That is your right to do. One of the big issues that's really coming up is on the lab issue. This was greatly discussed about whether this came from a lab or whether this came from nature. There are obvious issues and differences between the two to be able to know this. You had a lot of conversation on this. Scientists around the world were in conversation on this. There were different statements that you even made in your private notes and your public notes on it. In January the 26th of 2020, this is before we had our first tragic death of coronavirus in the United States, you wrote, it now appears using epi data that the genomic data, the first infection was in early December and was not connected to the market, which was the big rumor that was out there, is this wet market in China. We know the market was not the source, it was the amplifier.
Sorry, folks, I just realized I was muted.
You wrote about a phone call. You wrote the people on the phone felt the mutations around the furin cleavage site of the spike protein could not have occurred naturally, since it would require an evolutionary jump that they found nowhere in bat isolates. They bring up the possibility this could have been deliberately inserted and either accidentally released or deliberately released by a crazy person in the lab, the former being the most likely. February the 1st, same year, 2020. This is again still before our first death. There was not total agreement about the likelihood of deliberate insertion. Ron said he was sure that this could occur naturally and we should not waste our time and divert our effort to pursue this. This is expected of him since he was the original gain-of-function person with Yoshi. Also, Christian was withdrawn. The rest felt deliberate insertion was possible, and given the fact that Dr. Jingling Shi at the University of Wuhan has been working for years in gain-of-function in coronaviruses to allow adaptation of the spike protein to bind to the human ACE2 receptor, we could not let this go. That's a remarkable statement for February the 1st of 2020, when there hadn't even been the first death here, but we knew something was moving. You knew well that something was moving. You identified February the 1st before any of us had ever heard of the Wuhan lab, not only the Wuhan lab in the conversation, but literally the scientist that you named in your own notes, the lead scientist that was there. It's interesting to me on that, and the questions I was going to ask you was just your background and knowledge about the Wuhan lab and Dr. Shi and all the details. I'm aware of where you have been on trying to be able to plead your Fifth Amendment right, which is your right to be able to do. But I also want to be able to find out some facts to be able to help us for the future on this. The Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in May of 2020 put out a classified
He's not going to answer.
that has only been recently unclassified on this, that had this statement: we assess all the necessary conditions for an accidental release of a laboratory-modified coronavirus, specifically a coronavirus adapted to recognize human cell receptors, were present at the Chinese Wuhan Institute of Virology in mid to late 2019. Now, the question that I had for you is, this is May the 27th of 2020. This is the report that most people will see, is this. I have clearance. I serve on the Intelligence Committee. I've actually read this complete document unredacted. My concern is, were you given the ability to see this document unredacted? Based on your position, were you able to see this and to be able to get this information? I could see it, and I know what's here. Everybody else just has their conclusion at the beginning of it, not this. My question to you was going to be, did you have access? Because it's important for the future that people in your position do have access to this kind of information and insight. Is there any way you could answer that question? Were you able to give access to this data?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
You wrote on January the 26th of 2020, we should be allowed to send our CDC epidemiologists to China to work with them so they could see the data firsthand. You also wrote in February 12th, 2020, that you had great concerns about the World Health Organization because it depends greatly on China and, as you stated, often bows to them. Now, this is a really important issue that we've got to resolve for the future. It's not just our cooperation with Chinese scientists, it's our acknowledgement that China covered up their data, wouldn't allow our scientists to be able to come in. They cleaned up the wet market, they cleaned up the other areas. They wouldn't allow you to get access to all the other scientists who are there, including their health records, what happened to them, or even all the sequencing that they had done in advance. For the future of our research and our cooperation with any scientists around the world, I think it's really important that we resolve, if we're going to fund research and cooperate with you, we've got to have certain things from you. If things go sideways, we've got to have access to all information in all places. You were noting not only that China was affecting the World Health Organization and that China was bending them to their will, and so the World Health Organization was putting out data that you saw, at least at that point, as being from a Chinese perspective, covering up what was going on. But you also noted we weren't able to get access to all this information. We've got to be able to figure this out for the future to be able to make sure that research
He
that is
doesn't
done,
care about helping.
we have access to all information. If something goes sideways at some point, which clearly it did at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and that being, as was noted by many people, the only lab in the world that was doing research like this that had a lower standard of actually their security standards there than many other labs around the world, yet they were doing this very dangerous research. What can we gain, and what advice could you give us to say in a future setting, we've got to make sure that we actually get information from people and we can be guaranteed that we're going to get that insight?
Let me guess, I respectfully decline.
Yes, sir.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully
Yep.
decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
I yield back.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to the dark days of the coronavirus pandemic, one of the darkest days or times in our history. Hospitals were overflowing. Navy medical ships were docked in the Hudson River. Emergency rooms were forced into unprecedented triaging during the worst week of the pandemic, which happens to have been the last week of President Trump's first term. More than 25,000 Americans died of COVID-19. Easy to forget those dark days. But for the past 18 months, the Trump administration has been engaged in a campaign to rewrite this history. And today's proceeding, I fear, is part of that effort, one of the darkest days in our Senate's history. The Trump administration has launched a baseless set of smears against vaccines that help pull us out of that public health crisis.
No, they haven't.
Vaccines that are undoubtedly President Trump's greatest accomplishment. It has slashed funding to local public health departments that were on the front lines of the pandemic. And those healthcare workers are heroes. It has disparaged those heroes as woke or wasteful. And it has used a politicized Department of Justice to target the researchers who helped us track and understand the novel virus. Today's hearing is another page in that playbook, sadly, tragically. Dr. Fauci, you've spent 5 decades in public service, including nearly 4 decades in leadership at the National Institutes of Health, helping to conquer COVID-19, but also HIV, swine flu, Zika, Ebola, and other epidemics with real-life results saving human lives. Put aside all the flowery rhetoric that we hear in the United States Senate. Dr. Fauci has saved lives, as have public health officials in the United States and throughout
He's
the
also
world. And
taken
today,
a lot of lives.
we are demeaning and degrading their life-saving service. Republicans are eager to rebrand you as a villain in order to distract from their own failure to protect Americans from soaring health.
Says the man that if he's so interested in his own country, wearing a pin of America, and I think, because I can't see that all that well, Ukraine. Yeah, my friend, I don't think that your allegiance is fully to America. Seriously. Why should anyone believe that you've got America's best interests at heart?
Care costs, they've been rising astronomically in the last couple of years. And from
Peace,
unsafe
Sam.
food,
Thanks for joining.
which has caused cyclospora to spread, and resurgent measles as a result of the anti-vaccine policy. This hearing is the culmination of a years-long crusade, which started more than 6 years ago when Dr. Fauci dared to contradict President Trump. The campaign to vilify you, Dr. Fauci, is just one part of this larger campaign against science and facts, a campaign that has made Americans less safe. It is shameful that in a country like ours, a dedicated public service like Dr. Fauci has experienced persistent threats to his life since the pandemic because of the lies that are told about him. His attorney has been gagged, thrown out of this hearing room.
He's got a mountain of other lawyers with him.
But he has written a letter to the chairman that is an explanation for the reasons why Dr. Fauci is, in fact, invoking his constitutional right. It is a right. And I would ask that this letter from David Schertler and Danny Onato be made a part of the record if there's no
Without
objection.
objection.
His attorney has also issued a statement within the last half hour, I believe, that sets forth, again, the reasons that he is here to help protect his client's rights. And I would ask that that statement be made part of the record as well, Mr.
He
Chairman.
has other lawyers
Without
with
objection.
him.
Let's be very clear. The Fifth Amendment is a right of everyone appearing before an authority like this one.
Not whenever you've received a pardon.
It should be respected. And the reason that Dr. Fauci has invoked it, in the words of his attorney, quote, During and after the COVID-19 pandemic, Dr. Fauci appeared at least a dozen times for congressional hearings in the Senate alone in answer to questions about the very issues on which you purport to seek information. He has been thoroughly transparent and consistent in providing factual information to Congress, and he is deeply familiar with the processes and protocols of sharing information with the legislative branch. And then referring to the chairman, this years-long public crusade against Dr. Fauci makes one thing clear. This is not a serious effort to seek information from Dr. Fauci in a transcribed interview for a valid legislative purpose. You are single-mindedly fixated on Dr. Fauci, seeing Dr. Fauci prosecuted for imaginary crimes, and you are so invested in that outcome that you
What's imaginary about it? What's imaginary about it, Mr. Ukraine? Did we all imagine it whenever we had to social distance, whenever we couldn't see loved ones in the hospital? Did we all imagine it whenever we were pressured into taking an experimental gene mutating JAG, which, by the way, praise the Lord, I did not take? Did we all imagine that? Whenever little weasel man who is in front of you, who you think has been persecuted and he's on a witch hunt, because apparently we all just we just don't like him and we just want to pin it on someone. No, maybe we want to pin it on the one that was spearheading the entire thing through funding, through false information, and just basically making up rules as he went along. So maybe why don't you go and live in Ukraine? Because you're clearly not a good American citizen.
have created a personal brand around it. Those are the words of his attorney, and he cites as well the statements of the chairman, which indicate a clear intent that the result of this proceeding be a prosecution. Quote, the power of some of us must be
Bro, is it your intention to put people to sleep? Hurry up and spit the sentence out.
used for good, like putting Fauci in jail. That's from December 23, 2025. I want to give him a subpoena and a jail cell, also from December of 2025. The first was 2024. Those kinds of statements by the chairman of a committee in tweets certainly provide a well-founded fear that the proceeding underway is simply an effort to trap Dr. Fauci in some kind of criminal wrongdoing. That is not the purpose of a congressional hearing, not the valid purpose of a congressional hearing.
Heaven forbid there should be a hearing where they ask the man questions. Heaven forbid that now. That would be awful. What a witch hunt. What he sits there repeatedly going, on the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline, as is my Fifth Amendment right. It's a little cowardly weasel.
During some of the dark days in this body, under Senator Joe McCarthy, it became standard operating procedure to seek that kind of prosecutorial objective. We should not be part of a rerun of that kind of effort. This attempt to rebrand one of the most challenging times in our nation's history is a short-sighted act of desperation that will leave us
Bro,
less
you are
prepared
putting me to sleep.
for
Hurry
a
up.
next pandemic. It is an insult to the memory of more than 1 million Americans who died from COVID-19. If there are valid scientific questions about the origins of this pandemic, COVID-19,
You mean like the questions he was asked in the beginning about his funding into it, about his working on it? You mean like those valid questions?
about the kinds of steps that were taken to counter it, about the need for more preparation, they should certainly be addressed, but not in a show trial,
Oh my goodness gracious.
not as part of a continuing vendetta against a single individual.
Because he spearheaded it. He was at the front. He is the one that put his name. He was on magazine covers doing photo shoots because of how great of a scientist he was. He was a-okay taking all the props and round of applause as people were saying, "Oh, this is great. That there's going to be a vaccine." So he gets to take all the good, but now that we see that it wasn't what it was, that there was a lot of dangers, there was a lot of experiments, there was a lot of things that were corners were cut. You mean the guy that spearheaded it doesn't have to take any of that responsibility? Heck, yeah, he does.
And unfortunately, I fear that is what we are seeing today. America deserves better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
In no courtroom in America can you have your witness plead the Fifth Amendment, then your attorney gets to testify. That's what that letter is. The attorney's complaining and testifying, saying, he
Bingo.
didn't do it, the prosecution's unfair. You don't get to do that. That's one thing you give up when you take the Fifth Amendment. You say, I'm not going to testify. I'm not going to give you any information. You don't then get to put your lawyer forward to justify it. He can do it in the press, but you can't come and testify. He was not invited to testify.
Bingo.
And he was out of order, and it was appropriate to have him ejected.
It was, and he should have been removed earlier.
Chairman Paul, thank you for doing this. I think, I know in my state, people have been asking questions about Dr. Fauci for years. So Dr. Fauci, your entry has made clear that you love being a hero, a celebrity, and here having the eyes of the world upon you. You loved every newspaper profile, every photo shoot, every fancy dinner with the elites.
Which he had
To
many.
many Americans who lost family members, who lost trust in our federal government, you're not a hero. Unfortunately, you're a villain. You made yourself the story and abandoned the American people to serve your own ego. To begin, I'd like to talk about your relationship with David Morenz. He was the senior advisor in the NIAID, Office of the Director, your office, for 16 years. He was your friend. He was a frequent guest at your house. You reportedly co-authored over 50 scientific articles with him. You turned to him first right after COVID-19 first occurred. Earlier this year, the Department of Justice charged him with conspiracy against the United States, in addition to other charges as part of a conspiracy to conceal information and falsify records to suppress alternative theories about the origins of COVID-19. Now, you've publicly kicked this man to the curb, saying, Dr. Morenz was not an advisor to me on institute policy or other substantive issues. So let's start with the use of personal Gmail accounts and Dave Morenz's relationship with Peter Daszak. David Morenz tells Peter Daszak, President of Equal Alliance, and you've got this in front of you, it's Exhibit 1, and it's already in the record as part of this. It says, quote, P.S. I forgot to say that there's no worry about FOIA. I can either send stuff to Tony on his private Gmail or hand it to him at work or at his house. He is too smart to let colleagues send him stuff that could cause trouble. Dr. Fauci.
You hear that? He is too smart to have colleagues send stuff by email that would cause trouble. Meaning, Tony, as he likes to be called, Mr. Celebrity Tony, he knew exactly what to do and what not to do. But praise the Lord that things like this come out, that there are receipts.
Fauci, did Dr. Morenz's relationship with Peter Daszak concern you? Yes or no?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Did Dave Morenz ever bring
Weasel.
documents to your house?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Did you ever receive a text about your work at NIAID to your personal cell phone?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Did any text about your work at NID that went to your personal cell phone ever be?
Like, I know they have to go through this whole rigmarole, but like at this point, like what is the point? Like what is the point? He is not going to answer any questions. because he doesn't want to say or do anything that may indict himself or others. So I understand that these senators need to ask these questions, that it's part of the procedure, that all the minutes are taken, all of that. But like the thing is, like I'm going to call this a day now shortly anyway, because I am not sitting through like another hour plus worth of this stream just for Fauci to say on the advice of counsel, blah 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 blah. I'm going to continue watching this privately, but yeah, I think I'm going to call it here, folks. I had a little bit of work to get done today in order for my new channel, which will be up on Saturday. We're doing an unboxing of a lovely watch. So I will link that in the comments after the stream. So if you're interested, you can check that out. But folks, thank you very much for watching. I plan to get back into streaming and ease myself into it. Still having my health be improved, which is good. Lost a lot of weight, which is also good. But more importantly, folks, please do like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel. And if you've got any ideas about things that you would maybe want to see me stream or react to, please comment after the stream is ended. It really does help the channel out. Anyway, folks, thank you very much for watching. And I am now going to say goodbye to you. God bless.